Hey, I'm Jenn Gile, and I'm going to be your facilitator and moderator for this session on why no one is fixing vulnerabilities. And so I lead product marketing here at Endor Labs, and my background is in education. It's with building teams. And so I'm excited to bring in two of our customers of Endor Labs and people who are doing some really interesting things with their security programs, so that we can just have sort of an unstructured conversation about developer experience, about the things that you can do to improve your programs so that people actually fix vulnerabilities. So Alex, I'm going to pitch it over to you first. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Alex Olea. I am a DevSecOps engineer here at Starburst Data. I'm responsible for three things. One of them is CI security, so that's kind of on the AppSec side. I make sure that SaaS, software composition analysis, and all those fun things are up and running successfully and smoothly. A little bit of security operations and some cloud security work along with that as well.
And James.
Hi, yes, James Kirk. I'm the head of security and privacy here at Jellyfish, and I've been here for about 2 years and head up all of our governance, risk compliance, and security engineering activities. And yeah, a few things we're working on, I guess, going towards the end of the year are objectives and key results for Q4. We have an upcoming audit for our SOC 2 reports, as well as improvements into our just overall access control program.
And I'll put in a plug here. I think Jellyfish is doing some really interesting things security team-wise with how you measure success. So for people who haven't seen the blog that James and Josiah authored on our site, we'll share that in the comments. But check out how they're measuring success. Alex, what are your priorities for the next year?
Yeah, so for the next year, we're going to continue operationalizing and just kind of building upon the things that we've implemented in terms of CI security. So over the past 2 to 3 months, I've taken it upon myself to revamp our SCA, our software composition analysis program, by integrating Endor Labs into all of our pipelines, as well as show some TLC to static code analysis and start looking into things like dynamic application security testing and revitalizing things like secret scanning and all those fun things.
Fun. And part of the reason that I've invited specifically you two to be part of this session is I think both of you come with a really inclusive perspective of how to make security effective by making it all about the developer experience. And so let's just start there. Why do you think, from your experience, from what you hear in the industry, why do developers get frustrated with security? And why does that matter? And whoever wants to start first, fight for it.
Oh, you want to take us out, Alex?
Yeah. I can kind of jump in. The analogy I like to use is that security is almost like a buzzing mosquito in your room, right? It shows up whenever you don't want it. It makes things a little bit more annoying, a little bit more complex. You kind of have to find out where it's at and kind of squash that bug. No pun intended. But to kind of expand on that analogy, we tend to make things harder, whether intentionally or unintentionally, for our developers, right? There are things that may have a simple fix, and then security steps in and says, hey, no, we can't do it that way for XYZ. We have to kind of take the more complicated, the longer route. We have to do things, I don't want to say correctly, but for lack of a better term, we have to do things in a certain way. And that can be annoying. I've been there. When you tell a developer, hey, you can't use a third-party GitHub action or this and that, it does make their lives tougher. So I think that's one reason why security can come off as a bit cumbersome.
Yeah, it's really hard to be the organization that's job is to say no, right?
Yep.
James, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with Alex. I think one of the things that that I've worked both here at Jellyfish and then at prior organizations has been, to build empathy or EQ with the development team. So I think where I've seen some security teams struggle or cause friction has been just where there's a general lack of understanding of what developers are doing, the tools they're using, kind of their general day-to-day concerns, and instead of just making decisions or security decisions, correct security decisions in their mind, but without consultation or having the empathy of what the developers are how they might be impacted by this. And so I think ultimately I think so that's what causes friction, and one of the ways that we can work to do better at that on the security side is just work more closely with the developers, understand their concerns and the tooling that they need to do their job, and align around that, or try to find ways to mitigate some of the risks that might come with their day-to-day processes.
Yeah. So in both of your experiences, James as a manager, Alex as an individual contributor, where do you see application security or DevSecOps most often coming to those like friction points with development teams?
Yeah, I guess I'll take that one to start out with. I think what I've seen kind of some security teams make poor decisions on has been selecting SCA or source code analysis tooling in a vacuum. So potentially not understanding the extent or the depth of both the tooling's capabilities to get reachability and to get full full stack analysis, but also implementing tooling in potentially a blocking mode, or not taking an iterative approach, I guess is a better way to put it. So just going all in on a tool or an approach, and then really on the spot impacting and causing a lot of friction and consternation with specific engineering teams, because they're now blocking a dependency, for example, or something like that, instead of rolling it out in more of a transparent or passive mode, understanding okay, now do we have the right amount of reachability and invisibility into the stack, and then working with engineering to potentially turn on additional controls, or CI blocking or CI failures and things like that. So
yeah, definitely choosing a tool that everyone's going to use, but only taking in one narrow viewpoint is definitely going to cause a lot of friction. Alex, where do you see the most friction?
Yeah, so one area I see a lot of friction in is not consulting developers and engineering teams about the tooling that you plan to introduce, or even just POV in your environment, right? A lot of the times what I've seen is that developers already have tools in place, so you don't necessarily want to step on that tooling or kind of rip it out of the environment, but maybe complement that tooling and use it so that you can trust but verify, right? Make sure that the results coming out of one tool are not kind of analyzed in a vacuum, but also complemented with the results from the other tool, so that you can really see if this is a false positive or a real finding or something like that. So make sure that the developers are involved, make sure that you're being transparent about the process, make sure that they have some say in what gets put into their at the end of the day, their repositories, their CI pipelines.
Yeah, so I like to talk about outcomes before talking about the strategy to get there. So let's pretend you have a magic security wand, and you could make any developer experience you wanted for security. What would that ideal pie in the sky look like for me if I'm, writing my application and there's a vulnerability?
I can kind of take a stab at that one. So in my ideal world, security, well, let me backtrack a bit. Developers wouldn't even know security exists, right? Magically, container images would just be fully patched and remediated. Pipelines wouldn't just expose results, they would automatically remediate them without breaking some future build of the application in CI. Things of that sort. Developers would just kind of have leeway to write code and not worry about anything in the perfect world. Now, unfortunately, that's not possible. We do have to step in and make ourselves known and kind of prod and contribute and things of that sort. But in my ideal world, that's how that would function.
Yeah, and Alex actually kind of stole my answer, but it's I guess I'll say the same thing, and that's an ideal world would be where security is completely removed from the process, in the sense that we're not having to be consulted on a routine basis, or we're not the security team is not causing, I like to use the term friction, but causing issues with engineers, right? So having tooling that is so transparent that that they're not having to understand what tool we're using, right? They probably don't need to know that we're using Endor or some other type of security tooling that we have. And that in an ideal world, things are just fixed on the fly without causing dependency issues, or causing failures downstream, because now we're upgrading to a new dependency version or library version, and then all of a sudden it's it's causing some sort of issue with the actual with our application stack. So that would be the ideal world. But obviously, as Alex said, we don't live in that, and so I continue to try to work to get to the ideal world as best as possible, so that only when there is an urgent need, or something like potential security incident, or consultation is required, like threat modeling, is when the engineers or the dev team needs to reach out to us. But we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. We are, and Endor has actually helped with that quite a bit too.
Right on. So the ideal world for both of you, and I think I've heard this from other people in the community as well, is things are secure without developers actually having to actively think about security, right? That's probably only possible if you have a really good relationship with your engineering organization, right? So let's kind of segue to the diagnosing activity. What are some leading indicators in your experience that there's a problem with the relationship? James, you've been at some pretty big organizations, some small ones like Jellyfish. What have you seen?
Yeah, so I've got a kind of few things, but I think one of the first kind of tenets is you have to be able to measure, measure impact or measure potentially some of the challenges or friction that might be coming. So really metrics, and I know that metrics can be sometimes overblown by executives or management, but so focus on the things that will give you clear indicators. So like increased ticket backlog. Running a quarterly, mean number of incidents. So if you start to have an uptick in incidents, is it a training issue? Maybe you're causing people to purposefully circumvent security controls so that they can still do their job, right? So that's an indicator that I use. And then on OKRs, right? So we target 70% completion of our objectives for each quarter, and if those start to shift down, and we categorize them. So if we start to notice that more of our developer or security engineering specific OKRs are not being met or are having kind of missed percentages, that's also an indicator that I use. And then I got to pitch my own company's product. We also have a product called DevX, or Developer Experience, and so we do conduct quite a few surveys with our developers to understand, kind of their day-to-day work process. If they have feedback, or both positive and negative around security team support, and so we use those as sort of ongoing or routine indicators that there might be some sort of issues brewing, or maybe we're causing more friction to our development team when we can take other actions that won't cause that friction.
Yeah, and to kind of build on what you're saying there, I can see a couple of benefits of your strategy of being really data-driven. One is if you're at a big company where you don't actually necessarily have relationships in the engineering group, you don't have the water cooler talk as much, so you can use that data to pick up trends. And then the other would be, as a manager, being able to communicate up and say, hey, there's a problem, and this data is what's telling me there's a problem. Alex, you're more in the DevSecOps experience where you're kind of more expected to be integrated in with the development teams. So I think you probably have maybe a little bit of a different perspective here. How do you look for those leading signs that there could be a problem?
Yeah, keeping in mind that I've mostly worked at small shops, so it's a little different. I think one of the leading red flags for me is when you join in a security team and no one seems to have any idea of who the developers are or what they're working on or what repositories they're responsible for, that kind of thing. That strikes me as a red flag because it kind of makes clear to me that there is no relationship there, right? If there's no kind of two-way relationship there, no kind of ongoing communication on a weekly basis, it doesn't have to be daily or anything like that, but at least on a weekly basis, I think that's a red flag. I think there's opportunity for improvement there. Whether it's just being typed in a couple of PRs per week or just having a conversation or a 15-minute meeting every week saying, hey, these are the things on our plate, these are the things we think you should know about, that kind of thing. And I think referring to my earlier point, there should be some discussion on tooling. Developers should be aware of what you're planning to integrate. You should also be aware of what developers are integrating. A lot of developers I've noticed like open source tooling, things like Gripe, things like it's escaping me at the moment, but open source tooling in general. So make sure that you're not stepping on that or kind of breaking anything, and that you know that it exists. And lastly, I think another red flag for me that kind of gives me a sense of what the relationship is like is malicious compliance. So an example of that would be a developer saying like, hey, to their stakeholders, hey, we weren't able to merge this feature flag because security blocked it. There may have been a miscommunication there. You want to make sure that those things are very clearly communicated and those processes are out there.
Yeah. So in terms of you've found the red flags, there's a problem, even if you're well integrated with the other team, making some cultural change is usually necessary before you can start to fix the problems. Alex, if you get those bad surprises and you're like, where did this open source thing come from? Like, what's this new thing in the pipeline? Again, from both of your different perspectives as manager and IC, how do you go about kind of like building support to make a change? And I'll start with you, James. I'm sure there's going to be some data in there.
Yeah, actually, to plus one what Alex said, If the only time the security team or even security management is reaching out or engaging with with engineering leadership or your development team is when there's an issue or security is asking the engineering team to do something, that's going to cause an issue, because then the only time they interact with you, they get that bias of, okay, it's just going to be a bad situation, right? And so it's super important to build an ongoing relationship with both at the management level, but also at the IC levels. It's also critically important because, while in my role, I'm managing a few different teams and managing folks at different levels and different projects, I won't have the day-to-day insight into some of the challenges or in this water cooler talk that happens at the IC level between my security engineering team and our development team. So that is critically important. And then so what I do is often rely upon my security engineering team members to give me insight on, like, okay, these are some of the things or projects that potentially engineering is working on, which tends to be a little bit different sometimes than what I'll get from our engineering leadership. So I have a routine meeting with our head of engineering, and so I think that's important. I guess to summarize, it's important to have both management acceptance and buy-in and partnership between security and engineering, but also all the way down to the IC level, right? So maybe having your security engineering or DevSecOps engineers attend engineering stand-up once a month or once a week. But so keeping them very much on the pulse of what's happening at the IC level, and then having those more routine, like monthly or quarterly check-ins at the management level.
Yeah, and before we move on to the IC level, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about the manager role here, because I think a lot of times at the IC level, depending on someone's experience, the culture they come from, the confidence they have in the job, they might not actually be comfortable surfacing problems. And so, James, how do you coach a more either junior or just someone who's less comfortable with, bringing these things to you in a way that's like productive and going to result in positive reinforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think some of that comes down to coaching. Also, at this current organization, my last one, and a few others that I've worked at, there's sort of a but we have a heavy no blame culture. Now that comes to like mostly focused on security incidents, but what can happen sometimes is sometimes maybe a more junior security engineer or even an engineer or developer might identify something that they can tell doesn't pass the gut check, and so, but they might be concerned that, okay, if I report this, is it going to be on my shoulders now to fix because I reported it, or if I found something that looks potentially malicious or misconfiguration, am I going to cause a lot of work downstream because of a security incident? And so I think it's building a culture around not assigning the blame or work on the person who's reporting the issue is important, but also coaching and mentorship, especially for more junior folks, to encourage them to properly report things through their management chain and to not be afraid or hesitant to report things both up, as well as up the engineering or development management chain as well, because you don't want your engineers consistently having to reach out to management to have management then reach out to their management, because then you're just playing the telephone game at that point. So I think it comes down to mentorship and coaching, and then having a positive culture around, especially for security incidents or just things that require work or escalation or focus, both on security and development teams.
Yeah, and I mean that no blame culture often is in engineering teams as well, like the expectation that failures will happen, and that's how you learn. So Alex, from your perspective, both DevSecOps and an IC, like how do you go about building a case if something needs to change? I'll use the example of replacing an SCA tool. How did you make the case for that when maybe that might not have been the popular choice, right?
Yeah, so in my experience, one of the most effective ways to kind of be a catalyst for change is to provide real world examples, and not just real world examples, but real world experience too. So, unfortunately, we live in a world of endless data breaches, and just providing those examples, saving some of the more poignant ones, some of the ones that are related to, say, your industry or occurred to companies of similar size with similar tooling, things like that. Those can really drive home the point, because a lot of the times people don't want. Well, it's not that people don't want to, but people may not receive the message in the same way if it's not a tangible real world example. Hypotheticals just don't do it, unfortunately. one of the other things that I mentioned is real world experience, but not just real world experience and examples in terms of highlighting the problem, but that real world experience in terms of what solutions can you bring to the table, right? There's an old saying that, hey, if you don't have a solution for me, then I'd rather you just not speak. Some variation of that in some form. But talk about the things that you've done that can affect change in your organization as a solution. It doesn't have to be an all-encompassing change. It doesn't have to be kind of like the silver bullet to solve the problem, but it can be small incremental steps, right? Like implementing SEA to see what things are reachable, what things aren't, things of that sort.
Yeah, and then communicating back out how those changes went, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely want to give continuous progress and feedback.
So in terms of actually, you've diagnosed a change, you've convinced management that something needs to happen, and now it's time to collaboratively, long word for a Wednesday morning, build a plan. We're going to break it down into people, processes, and tools. Let's start with the people part first. Alex, you've talked a lot, when we have worked together before about the relationship building that you do as a DevSecOps person. Where would you go first in terms of the people element of making a change?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's particularly in today's kind of remote workforce and culture, and especially if you're working, 100% remote, I think one of the best things you can do is just make sure that everything you're communicating is just well spoken, well written, transparent, and try to convey some emotion behind what you're writing, right? And there's tools to do that, right? You can use, it may sound silly, but using emojis, using exclamation marks, question marks, just punctuation to much more better express the emotion behind what you're saying. What I find a lot is that things get misconveyed or misconstrued when it's written in text. And someone may take a message that was completely harmless and interpret it in the wrong way. They may take a suggestion and interpret it as a command and that kind of thing. I think another thing that goes a long way is just kind of try to build cultural understanding. So in today's remote workforce, you may have coworkers who aren't working in the US. They may be from Poland or Italy or Europe or Asia, wherever it may be. And those cultures have different customs and styles. So for example, if you have coworkers from Italy, there's something called relaxed punctuality in Italy, where people may not be on time for meetings all the time. It's just part of the culture over there. Just take things like that into account and make sure that you're always thinking about those things when you're communicating and working with others.
And James, what would you suggest when it comes to the people part of a change?
Yeah, a great answer by Alex, and I agree with him on all those points as well. Like, I also encourage my team members to try to view. It doesn't have to be on. I know some people, or especially in both on the security and developer side of the house, tend to be more introverts on average, and probably don't prefer to be on camera all the time. And so that being said, I do think it's important when you can, or time permitting, to hop on a quick Zoom call, whether it's on video or not. Video is great because then you can see mannerisms, like I forget what the percentage of breakdown between visual interpretation of people's emotions, or the point they're trying to convey is done through visual versus reading a text message or a Slack message. But also just voice, just the intonations of how a person's talking, how they're sounding, whether they're potentially aggressive or angry about a situation, or just trying to share their thoughts, right? And so I think it's oftentimes people can misconstrue or take things in a negative manner over Slack or just text messages or email, just because they're reading it in a vacuum, right? In isolation. So I encourage people to use Zoom or Meet or whatever tooling you want to use voice at least, and then video even more so, especially when it's an important topic or conversation. But obviously that's not going to be workable in every situation. Having every person hop on a quick Zoom call is not feasible. So in the absence of that, using emojis, trying to, where you can, try to show that it's a positive situation, that you're not, that the conversation isn't always negative, because people, again, my own perception is that people can tend to imply or think that things are more negative when it's just over a Slack message. And then also, they may think it's urgent when it's not, things like that. So just again, it's the people connection.
Yeah, I think very well said. There's definitely some well-documented communication, like drop-offs of, physically in person, then in person, but over Zoom, and you can see the video. And then without the video, just the voice. And then without any of that, and just the written part. So makes a huge difference. Okay, so processes and tools. Alex, give me an example of what it's like to collaboratively build a process between, security and engineering.
Yeah, so I think you have to be very, very intentional about it, right? So number one, like I mentioned before, bring them into the brainstorming sessions, bring them into every part of the process, if it's possible, right? There may be some developer teams that are just too busy, whatever it may be, but at least make the effort to get them in there. Try to decide on tools that can work, that will work together if they don't already have some tools, or if they do have tools, whatever. Gather continuous feedback, keep them updated on the process, be transparent. I just can't stress enough how much this just comes down to a human element, right? Just communicate with them, be transparent, make sure they're informed. If you do those things, I've yet to encounter a development team that hates me because I've been doing those things, or just dislikes the security team or something like that, right? In fact, most of the times when I see issues, like I've mentioned before, it's because one of those things is lacking. So just be intentional, set out the goals. And one thing that I do have to mention is there's kind of like the planning piece of the process where you do those things, you're transparent, you get them in there. But once you do acquire tools, and once you do get that process written, operational excellence is of utmost importance, right? So make sure that if you're integrating things into the repositories as CI workflows or CD workflows, make sure that those workflows are stable. Make sure that they know how they work. Make sure that they know who to contact if one of those things breaks. Make sure that they know where to find the results if they're scanning, if you're scanning something, or something of that sort. Operational excellence is really important, because you may get through the planning process, you may do all of those things 100% correct, but if the execution isn't there, if operationally this thing is always breaking and causing more headaches than what it's worth, then you're going to have a revolt on your hands, for lack of a better word. And that's not a fun time either.
James, it looks like that resonates a little bit for you.
Yeah, I had a whole other kind of response kind of queued up, but no, Alex nailed it again as well. I think, part of that feedback loop that I think Alex was talking about is, right, so using security scorecard, like scorecarding, or creating feedback loops. We use developer experience surveys here, but using some sort of way to collect feedback, especially for like ongoing programs, because let's say you roll out a new tooling, and the feedback is initially very positive. Well, things change over time. Maybe you have a new management team that comes into engineering, or maybe some of the processes that the engineering teams are doing ends up changing, or maybe the tool gets updated, right, and the UX changes, and all of a sudden it's not very clear to the engineers or the devs like what they have to do in the app, right? So I think it's one aspect of it. And the other one that I was going to mention is like going back to like the question around if I had that magic wand. I think finding tooling that you can tooling and security controls, or layered security controls, that you can roll out that are minimally invasive and transparent to the developers, right? So asking them to log into a third-party app that they would never use outside of their own day-to-day work is, I think, that's burdensome, right? So again, it's trying to, my entire philosophy is trying to get out of the way of the development team, while also ensuring that we're building a secure product and have a secure infrastructure and company.
Yeah, so I like what you're saying about picking your tools so that they'll fit in well. What are some like specific characteristics? If you were to start a list today of requirements, what tells you off the bat that a tool is going to integrate well, not just for you, but for the developers?
Yeah, and then I'm sure Alex has got a good answer to this one as well. But I would say it's got to integrate cleanly into our CI/CD pipeline. Has to be able to integrate with our current CI checks. It has to be at least integrate with or have an API support. And then there's I would say also some of the so that, and then one of the things that we spent a lot of time looking for is finding tooling that covered our entire code stack, right? So including reachability and library and dependency coverage, which is a challenge, especially for many tech companies, or just companies that have development teams, trying to find tooling that's going to provide that 100% coverage. And so that is the big thing for me was trying to find tooling that did have that coverage versus having 2 or 3 different tools. And then, one of those tools maybe requires the development team to they get an alert and they have to log into another tool, which again, is causing friction. So again, trying to find something that's a one size fits all, which is very difficult again in the security space, but that's kind of the approach that we took.
Yeah. So, things that hook in well that make it possible for them to use the tool within their regular workflows, such as in GitHub, full language support. Alex, what are some of your check boxes where you're like, these are the things that have to be present in order to provide a good developer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think James kind of nailed it. Making sure that full language support is there, making sure, as he said earlier in another point, if I recall correctly, that you're not evaluating these tools in a vacuum. One of the things that I like to really kind of own in on is the fact that, in order to not evaluate these tools in a vacuum, you have to have a good understanding of the product, right? Whether it's a SaaS product, whether it's an on-prem product. For example, if it's an on-prem product, go to the repository, build the code. If it's Maven or whatever language it may be, build it, see how it works, see how it functions, look at some of those CI workflows. Don't do it in a vacuum. Take a look at what your developers are working with, take a look at the code, try to build the product, try to understand everything, and then use that as a launching pad to kind of develop criteria in conjunction with the developers so that you can then make better and more informed decisions about, all right, this is the tooling we want to evaluate, these are our requirements, etc.
Yeah, so along those lines, I think the majority of people in application security roles tend to not come from a background where they've been coding. While I see more and more software engineers, perhaps getting incentivized by a security champions program and then, making the shift over, a lot of people don't come from that background. And so let's talk a little bit about how somebody without that kind of background can not just build empathy for developers, but to some extent actually understand what they're going through. Alex, you and I've talked before about some of the skill building that you've done. Share some of your top tips. What's gotten you where you are?
Yeah, so I am a bit of a special case. I did get a formal education in computer science for my master's degree, but I had always worked in IT up until I want to say 4 years ago when I got my first job as a security operations analyst, and then I used it as a jumping pad for a role as a security analyst. Now, that role was a misnomer. It was a security analyst, but I ended up working a lot with infrastructure as code, mainly using Terraform. And the way I did that is just an opportunity presented itself, and I made use of my curiosity to kind of just go all in on that opportunity, right? A developer at the shop that I was working at the time, Grow Intelligence, had said, hey, do you know how to write Terraform? I said, no. He said, hey, give it a shot. And I was curious enough to kind of latch on to that kind of that opportunity. And I gave it a shot. And, within a couple of years, I was contributing a lot with the infrastructure engineers and the infrastructure developers and building all sorts of stuff on AWS and GCP. So I think one takeaway from that is just remain curious. If somebody gives you an opportunity, latch onto it. Never let go of a chance to upskill. And those opportunities, they do present themselves. You just have to be there and make sure you recognize it and then take the steps necessary to make 100% use of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk in the industry about starting security champions programs to help developers be more comfortable with security. But I think, Alex, what you're describing is the inverse. It's like a developer champion program, right? Get closer to those teams, absorb more of what they're doing so that as you're implementing your processes and your tools, you can have more than just a base level of understanding. Now, James, you do hire, I know from when we've talked previously, you do like to hire people with software engineering backgrounds, but certainly I'm sure you hire people that don't have it. How do you develop them? How do you help them understand, what development teams go through?
Yeah, to kind of follow up on what you just said, my focus here has been to try to hire people that are software developers first, and then have security experience, and then I think it's easier. I could be wrong, and I'm sure other people have different opinions, but I think it's probably easier to train a software developer or someone who's a strong developer in security aspects, and then have them be successful in a security engineering type of role. More so than it's probably more difficult to train someone who's came up through security, has no development experience, and teach them to be a dev, right, and to have the same level of development skills as a strong engineer on the development team. So kind of taking that, we have in our security engineering team, we have very, very strong people that with development experience first, and then obviously are strong in security as well. Now, that's not going to be maybe an option, or that opportunity may not exist for other companies that are trying to do the same thing. And so in the absence of that, or taking that approach, one thing that we've done, and how I'm growing and mentoring my maybe less technical folks, like maybe in the GRC side of the house, is embeds. So we do what I like to see is embeds both on my team, so having our security engineering team members spend a week or two, maybe once a quarter, exclusively in the engineering or dev teams, right? So they understand exactly, like on a day-to-day basis for 2 weeks, they know they get a good understanding of kind of the routine, the stand-up process. They're much more familiar with the stack, and then also on the inverse, right? So if you think about career progression, some developers really, they don't have much exposure or experience with security, and so getting them some exposure to the security team is both beneficial to them from a growth perspective, but also just for training and development of my own teams that may. So doing inverse or reverse embeds essentially is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, and so I think it's good. We are coming up toward the end of our time, so let's end on like kind of a feel-good success story. James, you've seen a lot in your career. Share with us what you've learned, through some experiences you've had. What's a story you would share?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, or the best story to share, I guess, in relation to this topic has been sort of the example or contrast between my work here at Jellyfish as well as my prior time at my last organization, in that when I joined my last organization, there was already they'd just gone through a recent breach that time, so they were heavily expanding the security team, going from, I think, 3 people to they were trying to hire 40 or so people in a very short period of time. And but that place had already had a security culture developed, and it was to some extent a little bit adversarial with the security team and the development team, and it was quite difficult to, like, once you have that potentially negative culture, it's very, very hard to fix that, right? It takes a lot of work and ongoing trust and relationship building to kind of change that perception. And here at Jellyfish, it was, I think, very, very beneficial that I was the first security hire to build out the security team, and so it was sort of a green open field to be able to build that culture here. And so we really thankfully haven't run into much friction or much adversity here at Jellyfish. But I think that the big thing is, like, if you're coming to an organization as either a security leader or even as an IC, and you know that there's an established culture between the development teams or security teams, and it's somewhat negative, I think it's important that your management team tries to fix that, because it's one of those things that can continue to fester and get worse. And then also, as you're interviewing, if you're looking to take on a new role, especially if you're on the security side of the house, I always want to know, like, what is the relationship between the development team or engineering teams and security? Because again, if it's adversarial, it's very hard to get things done, and it's a low morale type of environment. So again, to simply say, try to fix that as quick as possible.
Would the interview panel to some extent give you an idea, like literally who's on the interview panel?
Yes. Yeah. So if you're interviewing for a security role and you never, if you're a security engineer specifically, and you're never interviewing with any members of the engineering team, and I'm not talking about a coding challenge, but I'm just talking about, like, getting to talk to an actual member of the security or of the engineering team, that would be a red flag for me.
Makes sense. Okay. One final question. It's a surprise question. Having gone through evolving your programs to be more developer friendly, to integrate better, how has that changed? Circling back to the title of this session, known as Fixing Your Vulnerabilities, how has that changed getting things fixed, Alex?
Yeah, so I want to say with some of the work that I've done in conjunction with the rest of my team and our CISO and my manager, we've kind of shortened the time that it takes for us to kind of triage and resolve vulnerabilities, right? So, we're not necessarily, and I don't want to say we've ever necessarily done this, but we're not necessarily throwing things over the fence at developers and telling them to triage and figure it out. Now, we have multiple data signals coming from multiple locations that we can use to kind of prioritize not just prioritize, but triage and prioritize, what needs to be done and how it can be fixed and that sort of thing. So I want to say there's been an improvement in our turnaround time for not just, things that we flagged internally, but also for things that our customers may flag when they're doing scans of our on-premises product and things of that sort.
That's great to hear. James.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the best signals I use is just mean time to remediation. I mean, we obviously have remediation timelines set for different criticality levels for vulnerabilities or issues, but I'll use a contrast, right? So I've worked in an organization where every time a new vulnerability comes up and we need to do outreach and ask a certain engineering team to make a change or to remediate the issue. If there's pushback every single time or questioning of like, okay, why do we have to do this? That is a good indicator of like, okay, that's not a healthy culture. Versus, if you have a strong trust built between the security and dev teams, when security reaches out about an issue, it just it either gets fixed immediately or gets fixed without any sort of pushback or challenge, I guess is the big thing, the word I want to use. So I think that's what I use as an indicator, and it's hard to measure other than using that metric of, okay, if we're supposed to remediate 5 vulnerabilities in 60 days and we're doing it on average 38 days or something, that's a good indicator that we're not waiting to the last minute, that engineers are doing this proactively versus reactively. So
fantastic. All right, we're going to segue over to the Q&A portion. So people will you can go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get some answers through. Alex, James, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation. I have probably 20 more questions, but I'm sure those will end up in the Q&A.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ab.
All right, thank you so much for that session. And Jen, thank you for joining us. Where are you, in the Austin airport?
I am.
Yeah.
You get all the experience of being in Austin without the heat.
Yeah. So just before I jump into some questions, I just want to take a moment to say a huge thanks to Deepika on our team, who has put this entire event together, worked with all of the speakers, helped us source really great content that is going to be genuinely useful for everybody. So huge thanks to Deepika. She's in here with us in the chat. So if anybody wants to give her a shout out in the chat, feel free to do so. And she'll also be working on our next LeanAppSec, which is going to be this winter, and is going to be mostly about AI governance and how to get started with it. So one of the questions that keeps coming up, and I think James, you touched on it a little bit in the Q&A as well, is really how do you manage up? How do you communicate these things to executives? I think both CISOs, but also other executives like CFOs. And one thing you touched on that I wanted to ask you about was quantifying, application security in dollars, right? When you're going and asking for budget. So how do you even start to go about that when you need to go and get a new SaaS or a new SCA or a new dashboarding tool? What are the first steps towards that?
Yeah, I think I actually put it in the answer in chat, but essentially I think there's kind of 2 components. One is as a security leader, you have to, the sort of table stakes or minimum requirements that you have to have in place, like logging, right? You have to have some sort of SIEM solution as a company, right? Some sort of way to analyze your source code, right? So some sort of SCA solution or approach to that. And so once you identify kind of those table stakes, right, that should be a component of your budget. Again, I'm thinking from the perspective as a security manager or someone who has budget, right? So you make those as sort of your core item in your budget, and then one thing that I think a lot gets lost oftentimes in the security leadership perspective is how much control the finance team has over the budget and the dollar amount that are allocated to a cost center like security. And so I think you have to have a good relationship with your CFO, right? So part of it is understanding how much you're carrying from a cybersecurity perspective. Like if you're carrying $2 million or $4 million or more than that, right, from a insurance perspective, you can take your risks that are open and tie those directly to the open dollar amount and what you're paying from an insurance perspective. And the CFO can understand that, right? Like they understand numbers, right? Dollar amounts. And if you're not tying it to And there's a bunch of different models you can use for how you calculate risk and actual dollar amount. But I think that's where I've been most successful, is like tying it. If you want to make something that's people can understand across the company, they're not maybe technology experts, dollar amounts make a lot of sense to them.
Yeah. So Alex, from your perspective, do you find yourself a lot having to translate, security metrics into business metrics, or having to participate in meetings where you have to explain, hey, why are we doing a certain initiative to stakeholders that are not technical or not from security? How do you usually approach that?
Yeah, I've found that metrics are great and they exist for a reason, and so does reporting. But I think the better way to go about it, if you have an environment that will kind of facilitate this, is to communicate kind of real world risks with real world examples. So I find that people just understand those more. A lot of the time when we're communicating these kind of risks or just explaining things to higher ups, executives, people who may not be security savvy, it all sounds hypothetical to them until unfortunately it happens one day to some company or some person somewhere. And the best way that I've found to really communicate those risks, like I said before, is to give them the article on Ars Technica that said, hey, a couple of years ago this company failed to do this and this is what happened. The other way to kind of get things done, at least speaking as an individual contributor, is regulation or compliance. If your company has to, if you're a SaaS company, you probably want SOC 2 compliance because that's just the norm in the industry. Well, if there's a snippet in the SOC 2 framework that says, hey, you need to have SaaS or something like that, or PCI DSS, whatever you may be working with, it's very hard for people to argue against those things.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that Alex said, but quickly on that point, I rarely try to use compliance hammer. If I have to use it, then that's sort of the last case scenario, right? And you can use compliance to encompass almost anything on the security side of things that you have to do for customer, like to get revenue growth. But if you're using the compliance hammer, you don't have, I think, a good enough excuse or answer, and that's just, I mean, that's kind of the approach I try to take. Like, we'll use it, but as rarely as possible. And I encourage other security leaders to do the same. Like, if you're using compliance all the time, then everyone's going to see you as from an adversarial position.
Yeah, I think something that Jenn and I talk a lot about and think about, being, very honestly, in marketing and cybersecurity, it's very common to market with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like, oh, this thing is really scary, and if you don't buy our thing, then you're going to be in trouble, right? That's usually how you market cybersecurity tools. But I think that I think both of us just don't want to do that. and two, it's different when it comes to software security, because I think that there's a case to be made. And I think, Alex, you touched on this here and in your talk in New York as well. There's a case to be made for working with developers and actually providing additional value to building better software. Do you think that's a fantasy, or do you think that's real, where application security can work with developers to actually ship better applications, rather than, like James said, having to resort to the compliance hammer?
No, and I 100% agree with James, by the way. I don't resort to the compliance hammer often, at least. I've had to do it once or twice, and less as a hammer, more of like hey, this is yet another reason we should do it. But going back to your question, I think it's absolutely worth it. One thing I like to say is that developer success is our success as a security team, and our overall success equates to customer success, right? So if you're integrating security into CI/CD, putting in these automations, all that fun stuff, at the end of the day, you're kind of embodying the DevSecOps, DevOps philosophy, right? Let's be more agile. Let's break down processes. Let's make things easier. Let's combine teams and skill sets and all that stuff so that we can ship software faster. Part of shipping software faster is integrating security, right? Because customers expect secure products now. So if you can get that done, then yes, it's absolutely worth it. You'll start shipping software faster. But also you'll also notice other benefits, right? So one benefit I want to talk about is, for example, I woke up on Monday, and one of the first things I do for better or worse is that I check my Slack, right? And in my Slack, I have a developer pinging me about integrating security scans into this new repository that he spun up for a customer. Turns out he was able to do that completely on his own because we had communicated everything. We were very transparent with him about how things work. And that stuff was just up and running, which is great to see that he kind of took that into his own hands because we empowered them to do so in a way. Yeah.
So a lot of the back and forth, and both in this session and the last session where Darren was talking about, he often mentions that software security is quality assurance in a way, like you said. It's basically checking for quality throughout all of these gates. And we're also talking about where in the software development lifecycle is the best place to communicate certain pieces of information. But a recurrent theme that I've been hearing throughout this whole day was education, right? How do we educate application security engineers about software development? How do we educate software developers about application security? I don't know, Jenn, how much the airport is letting you chime in, but you have a lot of background in this, right? In education and building curriculum. So how would you approach this? What's your take on do we need to force security education on developers or the other way around?
Raise your hand if you've taken one of those compliance training classes for work and liked it and actually took it seriously. James, liar. So like Ron mentioned, my background is in learning and development. Before I moved into tech and moved into product marketing, I spent many years teaching everything from citizenship law to leadership and management skills. And I think I'll try to share two nuggets. First of all, when you teach someone something that helps them do a better job at their job, the relationship that you develop as a result is really powerful. And so come into any of this kind of with that in mind, that you're looking to help them do better, not you're looking to teach them how to do something you want them to do. And that's really hard to kind of reset that mindset, because certainly most people who go in to develop any kind of training or, even a conference talk think about like, what do I want to teach, and not what do people want to learn. So that's the first nugget. The second is I would then kind of like do sort of a needs assessment, and it doesn't have to be any more complicated than what you might do if you're surveying your developers to see how happy they are with the security tool. And let me know if the background noise is too bad. Hopefully
manageable.
Okay, she'll be done in a sec. Doing an informal needs assessment can kind of help you directionally figure out what do people need to learn and in what way can you kind of like deliver that. So, don't necessarily think about it in terms of, okay, I need to go buy a class for people to take, or I need to make this really complicated onboarding program, but more, what are ways that I can help people in their day-to-day lives, get through their job more effectively. I heard a stat last year, I think it was, and I'm curious if James or Alex, if you have any thoughts on this, that something like only 30% of a developer's time is spent on coding. Have you heard that stat before, or something around there? Would you say that's accurate?
According to one of a developer I've spoken to, yes.
Yeah, actually, that's what our tool, my company's tooling is based on. Yeah, so it's about, I'd say 30 or 40%.
That's depressing, right? That's the amount of time that they spend. And so like, I would recommend going into it with the thought process of how can I help developers increase the percentage of their time that they can focus on the thing that they, went to college or whatever for, and not all these other superfluous things.
Yeah, and potentially pairing that with Dustin's framework for a security champions program. I have one more question about the embeds that you talked about, James. But before we do that, I just want to congratulate James Brooks, who is the winner for our second Millennium Falcon. James, if you're in the chat, say something. I will be in touch with you and I will send you a Millennium Falcon. But I do want to see a picture of it assembled. It is an amazing, amazing kit. So with that out of the way, just another question, James Kirk, for you about the embeds. Would you say that is a big company thing? I don't know exactly how big Jellyfish is, but we have like a pretty interesting range here. I had the same question for Dustin, right? Like, is this really only something that you can do once you have, 400 people in a company, like start embedding people from one team on another team? When do you start it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm wearing my hackathon shirt right now. I mean, so I think if a company can take, a few days off, once a year or, once, periodically to do a hackathon, they can also support embeds, right? And so, one thing I think when we started doing the embeds, we were probably a 170-person company. My last company, I think when we started doing embeds, we were more around 500 people, and we were doing multiple embeds at that time. Um, over my 20 to 25 year career, I would say the embed approach that I've taken here in my last organization has been the most successful, just around getting empathy. Like that's the biggest thing. I mean, empathy is like an overused term, but if you don't know the workflow of like the team that you're enforcing security controls on, like it just, there's a huge disconnect, right? You're just doing things in isolation. And so just doing the embeds, having someone that's like working more at the IC level, but also the management level, is super important to understand, again, the workflows. And so that they're not, well, there may have to be impact, but the impact can be more minimal. I think if that makes sense. I'm using very broad and nebulous terms here, but I think EQ is super important.
How much of their time actually goes to spending with the embedded team?
It's mostly meetings, and then what I have my team focus on is it's more hackathon focused, where it's like, okay, normally you wouldn't have time to fix this small issue because it's more of maybe it's a small thing that engineering's been assigned to work on. Well, maybe during your embed, you actually fix that issue, right, on the security engineering side of things, right? You work with a team, maybe on the infra side or on the on the front end of the application side of things, right, to fix that one vulnerability. But you're not doing isolation. You're working with the team. They understand kind of the fix, and so that there's lessons learned on both sides, right? Both on the AppSec side of things, or the application front end side of things, and then the engineering side understands kind of the workflow, what other things they have on their plate, like the other competing priorities, like which is sort of in isolation for a lot of security teams. Like you don't understand the backlog that other engineering teams have, right? And so you get the embed, they understand the backlog, and they can start to, I think, balance priority for issues when we start to send things over across the fence.
Yeah. Alex, do you have experience with these types of programs, either embedding security champions?
None that I've implemented, but I am a big fan of the process itself. So one of the first things I did when I arrived at Starburst Data around 11 months ago at this point was I reached out to the infrastructure team. They're the ones responsible for all the infrastructure behind our SaaS product. So, managing Kubernetes and all that fun stuff. And I asked them, hey, I want to be a part of your scrums. They happen 3 times a week. And I just want to be there. Number one, to be a liaison for security, but number two, like James alluded to just kind of learn about their processes, how they're working, how the, some of the issues that they run into on a daily or weekly basis, that kind of thing. And what happens there is you just get all this context, all this information that you can then utilize to kind of start building up your security controls, particularly in those pipelines and in those different software repositories.
Yeah. Well, the platform here is yelling at me that it's going to shut down the stream in a few minutes because we're coming up on 4 hours. So I just want to thank you again, James and Alex, and of course to all of our speakers. James, we didn't get to talk about you being named James Kirk and having Star Wars, stuff in the background, but I feel like that's our next LeanAppSec session, just 100% about that.
A little bit of irony, but yes, I'm both a Star Trek and Star Wars nerd. So
yeah, love it. I don't know if you can see the Endor poster there. So thank you so much for the session. Please check out the blog post that both James and Alex contributed. Alex, do you have any other places where people can meet you on the road? Are you taking your talk anywhere else, or was NYC that for now?
Not just yet. If you were at B-Sides, New York City, I was attending there as well. But as always, feel free to follow or connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to have a one-on-one with anybody who attended the session.
That's amazing. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jenn, for putting the session together. And that's it for this edition of LeanAppSec. And we'll see you on in the next one. Remember that you can go to LeanAppSec.com right now and already sign up for the winter LeanAppSec about AI code governance, join our Slack community, and watch all the sessions from all the previous LeanAppSec events, as well as participate in the Academy. Lots of really great resources there. No FUD included. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you on the next one.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Jenn.